Hi, my name is Sandy, and this is Ancestry Roads Webcast, where we talk about Appalachian stories. Today, we've got a really interesting topic and guest. We've got Pam, who's going to talk to us about a pioneer family cemetery of hers and the steps that she did to find a cemetery, clean up the cemetery, but also with the state of Kentucky to get an historical preservation status on it. The next step would be the pioneer status. So we're going to talk today with Pam about the historical status and all the work that she's done with the cemetery of her family. So let's welcome Pam to the stream. Hi Pam, how are you?
I'm good, thanks.
So where is this cemetery?
It's in Montgomery County, Kentucky.
And this is directly related to your family, right? Your family, your ancestor line?
Yes, my Dell line, and the oldest ancestor I have there is Thomas Dell, and he either bought the farm when there, and then the farm came to be Kentucky instead of Virginia, or he moved there and bought the land, but he was there prior to 1800.
Prior to 1800. And I want everybody to remember the date that Pam just mentioned. We'll talk about it towards the end of the webcast when we're going to talk about the next step, the pioneer status. But what we're going to do now is bring up a little slideshow of the cemetery and also talk a little bit about the work that needed to be done. Something very scary could have happened with this particular cemetery that we wouldn't even be talking about it today, as a matter of fact. And then the steps that Pam took to get this particular cemetery an historical preservation status with the state of Kentucky. So let's go ahead and bring up the pictures of the actual cemetery. So this is after you've cleaned it up.
Correct.
So this is a lot of work that took to get here. And it was established in 1813. So that is pretty old.
Yes, that was when Thomas was buried there, and that picture was taken last Easter.
Let's see. So that would about April 2022.
Yes.
Okay, let's go through a couple facts that everybody needs to know. So Pam had mentioned that it's in Montgomery County, Kentucky, yes. And there were at least 138 graves here, and the first date of interment was 1824, 1830. That's probably close to Thomas Dale. The last documented burial was August of 01. Can there be more burials today, or is the cemetery finished?
If you are a direct descendant of Thomas and you can confirm that through your DNA or your genealogy work.
Do you know how many spots are left?
We do not, because we've not been able to survey the cemetery yet.
Okay. And it's always important to know when we're talking about, especially Appalachian cemeteries and Appalachian family cemeteries and kind of Appalachian hidden family cemeteries, there are at least 44 graves in the Wilson graveyard marked with field stones. And I always tell people, please don't move stones around. If you find this interesting cemetery, you think it's lost, you think it's hidden, chances are it's not. Genealogists and families do know where these graveyards are. But if you start moving around those stones, you're actually moving a tombstone. So I always tell people, please don't do that. Just look and go from there. And Pam mentioned Thomas Dale. So he was born about 1763. And how did he come to, well, that would have been Kentucky at this point, or was he in Virginia? And this, of course, is before we became a country.
He was in Virginia. His parents came from, his mother and father, interestingly, met aboard ship. He was a yeoman, and she was traveling with an aunt and uncle looking for a new life in America. They met on ship and fell in love. The ship captain married them, and then they went on to, and when they went to Virginia, and that's where they made their homestead and had like 17 children, I believe. And whoa. Thomas was one.
Well, that's a pretty cool story, though, if you think about it, because they met and fell in love on the way. They're following a dream. And
My favorite love story.
it's a really cool love story. And then the last confirmed burial was Myrtle. And how is she related to you?
Myrtle is, she was a Havens. Her mother was a Wilson, and she was I believe she was the granddaughter to Robert, who was Thomas's son.
It's kind of interesting when you think about it. You look at our dates, 1903 to 2001, and she must know that she wanted to be buried in this pioneer cemetery.
Yeah, it took me a little bit of time to um, find her, and because they didn't have her death date on her marker, so I was trying to find out if she was actually buried there and what the date was. And so I finally found out she died in Ohio, apparently after her husband, Sam Havens, died. She left the farm and went up north and stayed with one of her sons. And when she died, it was her request that she go back home and be buried beside Sam.
Would be
And
buried.
another fun fact is on the other side of Sam is the lady he married prior to her. I call this my truffle cemetery because there's several like that. But they brought her back. I got the dates and everything and found out that they had actually brought her back to Kentucky. So I finally got a hold of the cemetery that handled her transportation, I guess you would say,
Mhm.
and they confirmed that she was buried there and what date.
You mentioned two things that I'd like to point out that she lived around here, probably born and lived around this
Yes.
particular cemetery, and then left to go stay with family, a son in Ohio. That's very, very typical to around that time frame of Appalachian families. We talk about that a lot about how they leave either to go live with family or family members leave, their children leave to go search for jobs basically, and we kind of call that the Rust Belt Highway and the Industrial Highway, a couple of things. So when Pam mentioned that she moved to Ohio, that's a very, very familiar sounding story that a lot of Appalachians hear, as well as the fact she wanted to come back home at the very, very end and rest in peace. So I think that's interesting. The other thing that I want to point out for those watching that are trying to figure out for sure and confirm that people were actually buried where we think they are. Pam mentioned that she contacted the funeral home. You can also sometimes contact a local county resource, but the funeral homes are really, really good resources. They keep all their records. They're required to by law. So if you think that a family member might have been buried in a family cemetery, and we're talking modern age pretty much, then what Pam did was fabulous. She went to a professional that handled the transportation and probably the burial too, and confirmed it. And I just want to point out this doesn't really have anything to do with the Pioneer Cemetery, but does with all cemeteries. Sometimes families, especially couples, will buy a tombstone, and when the first person dies, they automatically have the tombstone made for the husband and wife. And Pam kind of like mentioned it where you have one wife buried on this side and then another wife buried on that side. So just because the tombstone has the, let's say the man died first and the wife died second, but there's no death date on the wife's, does that mean she was buried there? She could have got remarried and buried elsewhere. So keep that in mind. And Pam and I do a lot of work photographing, documenting. Does a lot of work GPSing these types of cemeteries. So we work with this a lot, and we don't make assumptions because it's hard to say what where somebody truly is buried unless you have a source document. So let's talk about the surnames of this particular family cemetery. These are all names that relate back into Pam's ancestry. And we talked a little bit about the Wilson and the Dales. and the Law Wills. So there's quite a bit of different surnames in this particular cemetery, and these all are pioneer Virginia/Kentucky families.
Well, that's what we're trying to determine now. We've determined that 4 families came from either Virginia and North Carolina, and the one that I'm documenting right now that I'm trying to confirm, he actually came from England and settled in Montgomery County.
Oh,
So I'm gradually, trying to get as many pioneers, because they have to have been born in another state or even country and been in Montgomery County before Montgomery County was established in 1800.
and that will be the definition for this particular cemetery
Yes.
pioneer as we
Yes.
go along. And we'll tell you more because Pam has a lot of her and her cousins have done a tremendous amount of work, but the work still goes. This is the first step with getting the status of the historic. So there are 14 soldiers that were laid to rest here, but only one military marker is found. And these veterans fought in, I'm so sorry for my typo, the War of 1812, World War I, and World War II. What's important to note here is you guys are actually trying to document this so you can get the military markers from the U.S. government, right?
Yes, and we, along with and we also have a few that were in previous wars that we're still trying to document. Thomas and Robert Dale were both in the War of 1812. There's a couple, my cousin, she's big with the 𝙪 project, and they're helping her to determine the, what do you call it, Sandy, the Thames War?
Yeah, and that's really interesting because you can do a lot on your own for research. I know Pam and I do a lot of our research using familysearch.org because it's free and they do have a lot of documents, but sometimes you got to reach out, like you got to reach out to the DAR and say, I need help from the Daughters of Revolution. What can you do? And you don't necessarily have to be a member of this organization for them to help. They are very thrilled to help in any way because this also helps them recognize a pioneer or a veteran. So I think that's really cool that you guys have reached out as well to find maybe records that are not public knowledge.
Yeah, and we're working with, or my cousin Belle is working with them, and they actually have funding and stuff that they can help us with keeping the cemetery maintained and stuff like that, because that's one of our issues right now. We all live so far away that we can't run down there every weekend and mow the grass and weed eat and such.
I know that is, I have one of my Bonner family cemeteries in West Virginia is the same situation. We had a wonderful descendant take care of it, babied it, made sure everything was perfect, put flowers out every season. I think he was there probably 6 times a year just with flowers, but every other week when it needed mowed and taken care of, made sure that the cemetery tombstones didn't sink. Things, there's tons of maintenance with these really old family cemeteries. But when somebody like that passes away, and sometimes the knowledge isn't brought down to other descendants because you are, like you said, so scattered, you need some help, somebody local to step in, or funding, like maybe Kentucky or the DAR can perform for you. Now, this is just a snippet. And when I say snippet, I mean snippet. I mean, Pam had to fill out a form for the Kentucky Historical Society to get this particular graveyard into the Kentucky Historical Society census, which gives them this historic preservation. And it was a lot. The form is really a lot. But if you're looking at doing this in the state of Kentucky, this is pretty much where you're going to start with. And why did you even think that you wanted to go this step? If I have a family pioneer cemetery in Kentucky, and say I'm not really into family trees and genealogy, I don't really know what to do or why I would do this. So, Why did you guys decide this is something you want done?
There was just so much work to be done. There's so many people that are just, as you say, just have a rock as a grave marker. And I got the ideal that I wanted to make cement crosses to, put on every grave. So it's not just marked with a rock. And then we talked about the military markers, and we talked about, for the military people that didn't have military, and we've got more than 14 military now. I think Belle said she has 22. They've just not all been confirmed. And they will help out if you have documented proof that there's veterans buried there, and they will help you not only get markers but get funding. And so I just started investigating, looking for funds and stuff. And nonprofit, become a nonprofit is extremely expensive, and we
It
couldn't
is.
afford to do that. There's three of us that are basically the spearheaders of this, and the three of us together just could pull together like $2,000 for an attorney to get nonprofit status. So I found a website that tells you about preserving historical cemeteries, and that led me to this Kentucky census that you have to do for Kentucky to verify that your cemetery is actually a historic cemetery. And so I had to prove that 10 people were buried there prior to 1842 or 44, I think. No, 42, because the closest I had found at that time was 44, because I was like, shoot, he was 2 years too late. But so that led, and this website that I found tells you about how to clean the markers, who to contact to get the funding, and that's how I found this. And we just kind of rolled from there.
Well, I think as genealogists, it's super cool to have something like this be tagged historical officially or tagged pioneer officially. That hits to both of our core of the work that we do as genealogists. But I would think that even if you never looked at your family tree at all, I think that would still be something cool to say that you have, that, hey, you drive past there, or somebody asks you, or maybe your kid is in school and it's, every kid has to do a family tree at one point in elementary school, it seems like. You can say, hey, I know where to go because Pam did this work. And keep in mind, she's being very gracious here when she said that she had to find people who were buried here before a certain date and you had to document it. Let's just take, I think you said there were 138 buried here,
Yeah,
something like that. So she had to literally go through just to do the census 138 people, document them. And when we say document them as genealogists, and what a historical society would require is documenting their birth, their life through census, maybe draft records, military records, and their death and their burial for 138 people. This is not something you're going to do in a weekend. This is a lot of work. And let's go ahead and show you Pam's slideshow here real quick. And these are going to be pictures of before, during, and after of actually preserving. So when we talk about preserving the cemetery, we're going to talk about digging in, cleaning it up, cleaning the tombstones, making it viewable and presentable and walkable throughout the entire graveyard. And it's larger than I thought. I was quite surprised. So as we go through this, Pam, tell us a little bit about the slides. So who are these people?
this is from left to right. That Annette, she is a niece to Belle, who is on the far right, and Belle comes through on the Duncan line. But she's also everybody in there is related to Thomas in some form. And then of course there's me. Next to me is Philip, That's Annette's boyfriend. And I cannot say enough about these two. They have dedicated time and gas and their tools and everything to come up there and help clear off this cemetery and dig up stones and anything and everything that they could do. And they have never asked for a dime. And
Now,
they're not wealthy people. None of us are wealthy, unfortunately.
I was going to say, do they do genealogy day in, day out, or every week or every month? This is just a love project for them.
No, Annette says all that paperwork irritates her. And Philip holds a full-time job, so he doesn't. They keep up. We have a little chat group on Facebook, and
Mhm.
he keeps up with what's going there. When her and him go like by themselves, if they choose a weekend, he'll take pictures and document for us because he has to date. We have to have dated pictures every time we go, and he documents everything. And him and Annette post it for us and in our group and privately, so that Belle and I have it. And there's another cousin, Kathy. She is unbelievable with the area and how everything was set up and when every county was formed and who formed the county and who was big in the county and who ran what grocery stores and where was the best place to meet. I mean, if it's anything about the community, Kathy knows it.
Then she
She has
knows.
tons of obituaries and stuff. She even found me an obituary, which broke my heart because I love my babies. But the obituary was actually for the mother, and she was one that I was trying to document that she was actually there. Kathy found her obituary and some saved obituaries that her great grandmother had gave her,
Oh,
and the lady had actually died, and whatever she died from, her newborn baby had died just before her,
oh,
and the baby was buried in her arms.
oh, wow.
So I know the mother's there and the baby's there, but the baby wasn't put on the gravestone with her for some reason. But I have the obit proving that she's there with her mama, and I just named her Babe Johnson
Yeah.
for her record so that I'd be able to add her to WikiTree, and she'd have a name.
I will say that from my work working with clients in genealogy, I find that the babies being buried in the same casket or coffin with the moms is really, really popular in North Carolina and South Carolina. I don't know why. It may be other places too, like Kentucky, Georgia, West Virginia, but I really find that I hear that more in North Carolina, South Carolina, and it hits you. It's really hits you. Now, Pam did mention something that Philip takes pictures, and we'll tell you why in just a second. But let's look at these pictures. So this is October 21, and this is, I guess, Belle on the left and Philip on the right, I
Yeah,
think.
no, that's Belle and Belle's husband. They were the
Uh,
only two there that day.
And now, kind of important? Let's set this up for you. So, at the beginning of the slideshow, blue sky picture of the graveyard. It was beautiful. But guess what? In October 21, this is what it looked like. It didn't look like that beautiful picture at the start of the slideshow. And if I remember correctly, they were driving by and they were looking for it, or did they just happen to know where it is?
But she got in touch with me. We had been talking about the cemetery, and I'd been telling her about how I had added it to WikiTree and was trying to document everybody possible. And she wanted to go and check it out to see if her ancestors were actually buried there. And I had sent her pictures that I had took back in '98, I believe. And back then it was still beautiful. And about 12 years ago, the man that he was one of our, as a descendant like us, he had lived in the house on the farm, and he had for years and years took care of the property, and he had fell ill, and I don't know how long he was ill before he passed, but when he passed, there was nobody else that picked up the torch. So I had gave Belle the GPS coordinates, and they went and they found the property, but they couldn't see the cemetery.
Hmm.
And they were going back down the road really slow, and her husband looked up and he said, "I'm not real sure, but I think I see a marker up there." And there's one marker that's probably 6 feet, 7 feet tall,
Oh,
about 5 foot wide. And he saw the top of that marker. And so they drove up behind the house, took the driveway up behind the house, and found the cemetery. And the owner of the property just happened to be there that day. And Belle talked to him, told him who she was, and asked him if they could go into the cemetery. And he was not a very nice person.
now
And
hold on. Pause for a second. There is, and I hate to interrupt Pam because this is. I want everybody to make sure that you listen to this part of the story because at the top of this webcast, I talked about something very scary could happen that we wouldn't even be talking about this particular cemetery right now. And Pam is going to tell us some things that like it really shocked me when we talked about it. It kind of made me sick as a genealogist. I got kind of ill, so I'm sorry to interrupt him, but I really want everybody to hear this part of the story. So she said that they went to speak to the farmer. I guess he's a farmer, right?
no, he's not. He lives over in West Virginia or Virginia, I believe. He was renting out the house, and the last person that was renting it out moved out, and now I don't think he's going to rent it out anymore. My guess is it'll be demolished, and he'll add that to another little section that he can plan on because he sharecrops and he lets people buy an acre or two and plant what they want on it. And then
Okay,
he
did your
puts them.
cousins went to talk to him about this particular cemetery to gain access to make
Yes.
okay. So I'll let you finish the story from here.
Okay, so when she talked to him and asked if they could go inside, he said, "I really don't care what you do." He said, "So to be honest with you," I have already started the paperwork. I haven't filed it yet, but I'm going to have that cemetery pulled up and I'm going to have it determined as is an abandoned cemetery. I'm going to have the graves pulled up and they can move them wherever they want to move them. And I'm taking down the fence and I'm keeping the land.
And that's something that is valid. That is something that can be done in this real world. And I will tell you that, at, you know, my research, my ancestors mostly Virginia, West Virginia. As a genealogist, just hearing this yet again, and Pam's told me the story many times, but just hearing it again, my heart sinks because as Pam has documented, Thomas Dale has so many descendants and gone. A life, rest in peace, gone. And this is something that could truly happen. This isn't something that just one person, this property owner said, "Hey, I think I'll just go do this." This is a very valid legal process that could happen to abandoned cemeteries. So, how do we combat that? Well, Pam's going to tell us how did you combat that and make sure that the cemetery still exists.
Well, he informed Bell that he had checked into it and that if the cemetery is not visited and maintained by the family for 20 years, that the cemetery is considered abandoned and can be moved. So Belle and her husband actually went inside the gates, which was broken down, which is against the law on his end because his animals were getting in there and trampling the graves and
Oh,
breaking the stones. And so they went inside and they didn't have any tools with them. So they hand pulled weeds and stuff so that for like 2 hours, she said, so that there was, and then this is why these pictures are here. She documented that we were here on this date, and we did do work.
and
So you
that
can,
stops the time. And the clicker, for example, if they just drove by, or if they even got out of their car and just walked around, that wasn't enough to stop this 20-year ticker. They got out with their hand, and they weren't planning to do this. They just wanted to visit it and see where it is. They weren't planning to get out there with bare hands, no gloves, no mud boots, and start digging up weeds and roots and clearing. But once they found out, oh no, this guy is for real. He's got
he
the
wasn't happy either.
yeah. So it's like amazing. And Pam's right. You're looking at them on that day that they were told this cemetery is going to go bye bye. you know, that they got out of their vehicle and they said, "No, sir, it's we're going to do something about it." Let me go ahead and click through. Now, this is a little bit later, about a month later, I guess, and they decided. Looks like they came to the cemetery with chainsaw.
Yep. Chainsaws, weed eaters, the gloves and stuff that you mentioned, stuff
Yeah.
to clean the monuments, stuff to dig up fallen gravestones if they found them.
I mean, if you look at these pictures, it's a tremendous amount of work. This wasn't just something like go mow the grass. This was a lot of work. So again, now November 2021, the ticker starts again. So, I know Pam's and her cousin's goal is to always continue to maintain this so it doesn't get in that situation again. But I just want to point out every visit they document so it starts the ticker over again. Because when you're talking about dealing with, courts and legal systems and paperwork and red tape and process, you need to document.
And another good thing about signing up with the Kentucky Historical Society is when he does that and tries to move the cemetery, he has to contact the descendants. And the Kentucky Historical Society has contact information for me, Belle, and Kathy. So he has to, him or the court or whoever handles it has to contact one of us and say, hey, we're getting ready to move your family cemetery. Where do you want these graves to go?
And
And
I don't,
if they do that.
I know that some historic state. I'm talking state level, not local level. I'm talking state level because that's really what we need to talk about when we're talking about such a large controversy as this. Because I'm going to call it a controversy because it really is. They they fight for you. The historical state historical societies will fight for you. And as Pam mentioned, she has a little bit of a benefit because it, she has pioneers in here, but she also has veterans. And those two things are in this family's favor for preservation and not getting just picked up, moved to wherever. And when they say that they are going to come and move the graves and things like that, it does not mean that they stay together. There's not this patch of land out there that, we're all rich and we can buy for a cemetery or a graveyard. It means they're going to put them in city, county, municipal cemeteries wherever there's room. And those rocks, those 44, rocks, those aren't going to get moved. We're talking about ones with real tombstones that have the chance of getting moved if it's abandoned. But let's look at these. So this is the same year. This was just about a year ago that we're talking now. And on the left, you can see the March photos. Look at the weeds. They're knee deep. I mean, over your knee. And look at the work they did on Memorial Day. And also, I want everybody, if you can, look at the picture on the right. This is where I was surprised. This cemetery goes back pretty deep too.
According to my measurements and the GPS coordinates, it's about a third of an acre.
So it's not just this real tiny little section. It's laid out. So as genealogists, what this tells us, because of the space, there are a lot of people buried here that do not have tombstones. And I think you mentioned there's a service that comes out to survey to see if there are people buried there without tombstones.
Yeah, they have some kind of machine that they use, and they can act, and they use, I guess it's like spray paint. I don't know if it comes out of the machine or how it works, but it will detect somehow, like with sonar, radar, or something, if there's actually someone been buried there, and it marks it off with the paint. So you'll even be able to tell what size the grave was, if it was an adult or a child, and that will help me determine who was buried. And most of them are kind of in clusters. There's like a section I call the Dell section, a section I call the Johnsons, a second I call the Havens and Ishmael section, that sort of thing. And so by knowing here's two adult graves and a child grave, most likely that's going to be a child of that man and woman. So if the man and woman has a documented grave, there's a child right beside them, and I know that there was a child buried there, but I don't have a death certificate. I knew they were, or they had a death certificate. And a lot of times in early 1800s, there was a place in Cincinnati that opened up that was a mortician school, and
Oh,
they were paying people to buy freshly buried bodies. And people, that's where grave robbing came from. They were going to cemeteries and pulling up these bodies and
to
taking them to
practice on.
Cincinnati and getting $35 for them.
Wow. That's another amazing story. And also, like you mentioned earlier, the baby, a lot of times when babies were born or died on the farm, especially the first year, their births weren't always documented, and definitely their deaths weren't documented if their births weren't. That's why if you go searching records, you'll see delayed birth certificates sometimes because later in life that individual needed a birth certificate. But if you're living on a farm and you're birthing babies, and as you said, that one family has 17 babies, the last thing you're thinking about is, let me go down to a courthouse and register this. They weren't buried, or they weren't birthed in hospitals or things like that. After, by the time you have your 17th baby, you know how to do it. So you're gonna just say, okay, you were born on this day. They'll mark it in the Bible if we're lucky. And
If we're
but if
lucky.
they die, usually within the first year, it's not documented. You got to find things like you said, the obituary or a family story or Bible. It's really amazing. So you guys have done tremendous work. Just looking at these pictures, that's tremendous work here. I love this that they're showing military graves. They're still looking for more military ancestors that were buried here. So this is an ongoing process. But if you look at the tombstone on the left, it was hand chiseled. It's an example of in between just a plain rock and a fancy tombstone where these are pioneers. These are simple farmers. These aren't people that have millions of dollars or even hundreds back then at this time. And I just love the respect that they did. They
That's it.
hand chiseled it.
That was Ezekiel Bogas, and there's two flags at his grave because his father is documented as being buried there in Wilson Cemetery beside him, but he never got a marker. So we want both of them to have military markers.
That was great. And then this is actually, you'll see Pam has her clipboard for the Kentucky Historical, and I think the Pioneer. You have to GPS every
Yes.
tombstone or grave that you know of.
Yes.
And I will mention to everybody, this is not necessarily quick, easy work. A lot of times we're going out to these cemeteries when we can, usually on the weekends, unless you're kind of like crazy people like Pam and I, and we go on vacation to a cemetery to do this. But you're dealing with elements. Sometimes we're in the rain, sometimes we're in the heat. There's always bugs, flying insects and bugs around and things like that. So to actually document each person and put their GPS down and then convert all that written information into a document that the historical society accepts, this is just not a weekend job. But you can tell you guys went back out to not only GPS but to put flowers and looks like mow and clean up some more.
Yeah. The
And the younger
this
generations
is
also.
all children and grandchildren of Belle and her husband, and they I believe they're just the grandchildren here.
So
And the
that
little redhead had been there. I think she was there prior to Easter with Belle back in the fall, and Belle had was keeping her for the weekend or something. And she says, "I'm going to the cemetery again this weekend. Do you want to come with us?" And she said, "Yeah, I want to go, but only if I can take Emily flowers." And
oh,
Emily is the little girl that's buried in that grave that she's sitting with, and she was 13 years old. It's too early for death certificate, so I don't know how Emily passed, but she passed at 13. and she took her those bucket of Easter lilies so that she could give her flowers. So
And
that's hopefully with us, that's getting these younger people interested in the
yes,
preservation and in the genealogy, understanding, why Belle was out there and why we were doing that.
because we're going to need her to continue to make sure that it never hits the 20-year mark of not visiting and abandoned. So we're going to need this younger generation to accept, buy into genealogy and ancestors. It's important. It is a part of you. It's part of your DNA. It's a part of who you are. So
And
it's
let's
really important to get the younger generation involved.
and let's think about the younger generations are more into technology. They're lazier than prior generations. So as much as we document now is less work for them,
Yep.
so that they can do, hopefully do more of that hands on, and it not be as much as trying to prove who's buried there and why they were buried there and when and all that sort. That's why I want either the cement crosses that I'm trying to make
Mm-hmm.
or the military markers, whatever I can to say, here's a grave, here's a grave, here's a grave. But the survey, that's, we got to get funding before we can get that done, because that's like, for some reason my brain keeps saying $3,200.
Is
So
that for that one that does the special rate? It goes through with the spray paint. Is that about
yes,
that? So,
yes,
or so say at least around $3,000 to come do that,
yes.
and that's another reason why to have the DAR help. That's another reason why to have the Kentucky Historical Society help if their funds. I know all nonprofits and all historical societies are very tight on funds because funds are tight everywhere. But even if they could funnel, if you could funnel some from this location and from this nonprofit, and then maybe donations and things like that, that all helps. And we always say with nonprofits, literally $5 is like a huge deal to us. So every little bit does help. And it looks like we got some cleanup going on here too, some weed whacking, and
Uh-huh.
and you know, like I say, if you look at the pictures, that back corner, that back left corner, you're in the South. Weeds grow fast. I mean, they are the most healthy thing in the South, I think. So it's a lot of work, but it's also frequent during the warm weather months. And this just takes a look at the GPS that Pam has put together. So she's had to go and actually make sure that there is a marker or a person buried in each of these dots and document it, who it is, their dates, and the GPS number. And this is only what she can see. This is before you have that company come in and see what else they can find. And it's interesting, you say inside and outside of the fence. So now I'm a little curious. If it's outside the fence, what does that, not so nice gentleman that has the adjoining property that was going to certify this as abandoned, can he touch the ones that are outside of the fence?
No, they're supposed to actually be, I believe it's a 30 feet grace or leeway around the cemetery. We
Okay.
also have proof that the cemetery, that the fencing around the cemetery has been recently updated, so that to us says that they pushed, and there's grave markers that are right up against the fence, which they don't bury people like
Yeah.
that right up against the fence or up against a large tree trunk. They just, they don't do it. So that tells us that at some point they shaved some of that graveyard off to get them a little bit more planting room, or room to, as you see, there's a road there on the right hand side of the screen. And there's also the possibility that some of those outside of the fence line could have been slaves.
Oh, well, that's interesting too. So that gives you another avenue to look to try and document, because as we know, some older census records we'll have a slave schedule, but sometimes it's hard to find out who they are and where they belong. And this is just another piece of their puzzle that we can help solve. So, okay, that's really interesting that you bring that up as well. And we talk about cleaning markers, and there is a product. It's literally called D2. Everybody goes, "What's the D stand for?" But it's a word I'm not going to pronounce. But it's literally called D2. You can get it at hardware stores. You can get it at Walmart. You can get it anywhere. It's really good. What I know, what I've done, I used to bring my son with us when he was younger, and this was actually a service project that he would do. We would go to some of the older family cemeteries, and what we do is we would spray it, and then we'd come back a week later with an extremely very 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 soft bristle toothbrush and just gently wipe away some of the dirt and grime. But you can see what the D2 did for their cemetery. On the left, you couldn't even read it. And then on the right, you can now see what it is and who it is, which again, Pam needs to get that historical designation for it. But this is going to be my little soapbox moment. So when you do go to cemeteries, remember that it's just not fair game to go in and do whatever you want to clean them up. I think most people now know to be cautious with tombstones, but back in the day, it was like a free for all. Some people I've known pour bleach on them, use those really heavy duty scrub brushes that you clean your car or tires, the mud off of them. I've seen people throw flour on them to try and get a transcription. I've seen people try to do pencil etchings, things like that. Don't do that. These are not your tombstones. This Nobody's asking you to really go in and attempt to use some type of supply to clean a marker if you don't know what you're doing. And most of us that do visit cemeteries, we do use D2. And I will tell you, it's not super, super cheap. It does cost a little bit, but I also get double use. I use it on my lawn furniture outside, my plastic chairs and things like that, and it works great. But please be mindful. Like if you went in to help Pam and her family with the cemetery, and you went in with a hard bristle brush, or if you threw bleach on this, they wouldn't have this. And look at all the work that they've done to clean it up. So just be mindful. And I can tell you for sure, if you go into a city, municipal, or church cemetery and try and use harsh materials, you're going to hear about it. And it's some states you can actually go to jail for defacing a tombstone. So keep that in mind. So D2 works wonders. It's not invasive. It doesn't damage the tombstone. As you can see, look at the detail from the top all the way down to the bottom on the right. It clearly shows you the names, a little bit of description. Did you ever figure out what that top symbol was? We thought at one time it was Masonic, but it's not, right?
I I thought it was a Mason, Freemason marker, and I contacted them in a Facebook chat group, and they told me that it was actually some kind of order of automobile engineers or something, mechanical engineers, something is what it was, and not the Freemason marker. So
Interesting. That one.
because the Masons will also help with funds and stuff if you can prove that there's Masons there.
Oh, well, there's another good tip. That's a very, very good tip because they do like to help as well. They don't have a problem with going out physically or with money. They will do both with it. So then what I guess we need to talk about next is what is next. So let me bring this screen up real quick for you. And oh, I do have it, Pam. So I didn't think I had this. Let me see if I can bring this screen up real quick. This if you want to contact Pam with questions about what they have done, or you want to donate to the cause, or if you have, you know, time, you live around this cemetery, and you want to volunteer and come and mow it, de-weed it for them, because like she said, they don't live especially close. Something else that Pam told me that was fascinating is that if you need community service because a judge told you need it, then this is a valid reason you can go and mow the grass as a service. So that, I think that's pretty cool too. Okay, let me bring up, this is how you get in touch with Pam. So Pam and I both are members of WikiTree. It is a free, I'm going to tell you one more time, absolutely free to use. It is a one tree. So everybody contributes to one tree. So if there's a George Washington that was president of the United States, he only appears once, and everybody contributes and collaborates with it. But again, it's free. And Pam has created a page here for the Wilson Graveyard in Montgomery County. What's great about this is it gives you all the details that we already kind of talked about. But the main thing that I want to mention is if you want to get in touch with Pam, again, if I know a lot of you out there have these type of cemeteries and you want to know where to get started, or you're in the process and you have questions, or you need help filling out the forms and what they're asking for. And then also if you have any spare money and you would like to donate to the cause, or more importantly, you live near this particular cemetery and can offer your time with yourself and your mower, maybe your kid and your mower, I know that her family would love to have, especially that last one. It's tough. This is how you can find her. So you can go to wikitree.com, and it's the Wilson Graveyard. And I will put it in the description below. I will put the link down below as well. So that's how you can contact Pam. And like I said, WikiTree is a great way to collaborate, to communicate on a shared resource. Okay, let's talk about the next step. We have about 5 minutes left, so let's talk about the next step. The next step would be to get it designated as Pioneer. This is really special to get it as a Kentucky Pioneer cemetery. So you got work to do.
Yeah. I still have about maybe, I'm gonna say 5, maybe 10% of the graves. My GPS app messed up for some reason, and it took the pictures of the graves, but it didn't keep the coordinates for some reason. So I've got to go back up and get those GPSs done, and I have to do some more as far, they want me to GPS all 4 corners of the cemetery, more for, like I said, the measurements and how big the cemetery actually is compared to what documents. The documents say it's a third of a cemetery or a third of an acre. My measurements do not add a third, which brings us back to it's probably been chopped up a little bit.
Yeah, somebody's encroached on your cemetery area.
So I've got to finish doing that and get all that documentation to the Kentucky Historical Society. And I have to prove that 10% of the people buried there were there prior to 1800. So to have enough pioneers for them to deem it pioneer.
It's a lot. So she's worked on one, and you're almost done with the step 1. Step 2.
Step 1 is done.
And you're going to go probably and resurvey the boundaries again, just to be sure, it sounds like. And then step 3, I think you have step 3 done as well, or close?
Close, yeah.
Close. And then 4, this is, and again, we're talking about pioneer. This is a unique designation. This isn't something that everybody's going to get. For example, my West Virginia family, they wouldn't, if it was Kentucky, because that's where we're talking about, they would not get this probably Pioneer Cemetery, because as we know, Virginia, parts of Virginia became West Virginia. So this is unique to Kentucky, but it is similar across other states. But this is such a special designation. This is like gold mine. So a cemetery that's over 10% of the existing gravestones. That was the key that I was like, whoa, this is this is tough because not a lot of these cemeteries have those gravestones. So it, this is awesome that you found it for your family. That's just it's unbelievable how much how many family cemeteries just have rocks. If we're talking, we need existing gravestones. Okay. So that kind of talks about the process that we've gone through and also where you're going next. So when do you think you'll have your pioneer
I'm
document
hoping
into the state?
I'm hoping to have it. I'm gonna say I probably won't be able to get up there and get it. The driveway going up to the cemetery is not paved, anything like that, of course.
Mhm.
So it's kind of rough to get up there in the wintertime when it's muddy. So it'll be spring until I can get back up and finish doing the GPS, and then it's just putting it all in the forms on the computer and submitting it, and then hopefully by summer we will be able to have the presentation, and they will give us a, as part of getting it made a Pioneer Cemetery, we will get a Pioneer marker that will go just outside the gate. And we want to have a set. We had a small one for when we were deemed historical last spring,
Hmm.
but we want to do it again for the Pioneer Cemetery.
I agree. I mean, it's just it's unique. Not very many get this designation. Well, not very many put in the work like you guys have to get the thing. So I just want to thank you, Pam, for it not only sharing your experience but explaining it. Because again, if for example in Kentucky, if it hasn't been visited in 20 years, it's gone. And there were a lot of tombstones that we saw out there. So I think it's great what your family's done. I can't believe how much work you guys put in and continue to put in. And we hope you come back and talk to us about the celebration for the pioneer. We'd like to see the sign.
Definitely.
Okay, everybody. I will see you next time on the next Ancestry Roads webcast where the Appalachian stories are. And bye.